This is a Devar Torah on Parshas Mattos-Masei. This year we're reading a double parsha. It's the two last parshas of Sefer Bamidbar, the fourth book of the Chumash. And it begins, we're talking about Nedarim, different oaths, different oaths, different forms of making shavuos, and it continues, and vows. It continues with Hashem telling Moshe, you're going to take vengeance on the Midianites, and after that you'll be gathering your people. In other words, Moshe will die. Now, interestingly enough, he could relate it, but as soon as he's told the commandment, he goes and does it. He organized the army as Hashem commanded, 1,000 from each tribe. And after they defeat the Midianites, they then have a whole discussion on the division of the property. And we then got on to a very interesting incident. The children of Reuven, tribe of Reuven, the children of God, said abundant livestock, sheep, cows, all the rest. That was very great. And they saw the land east of Jordan, not Eretz Israel, not the land of Kedusha itself, but the east bank of the Jordan. And they said, that's what we want to choose for our land. Moshe is very disappointed because he said, if you just stay back there, we had a division at the time in Meraglim, you're going to make an even worse division. And Moshe says, if you're going to get that land, you're going to have to help the other tribes. 10 tribes get their land in Eretz Israel. The tribe of Reuven and God said, listen, we'll build pens for our animals and we'll build cities for our children. Obviously, their priorities were totally materialistic and reverse. When Moshe tells them what's necessary for them to do and help the other tribes cross into Eretz Israel proper, he says you'll build houses for your children and then pens for the animal, trying to straighten out their priorities. And it talks about 2.5 tribes are being given the land because they also have tribe of Manasseh. This is a point I'll be coming back to in more detail after the overview of the Parsha. Now, Parashat Mattos-Masei starts off with Elu Mesa'y Bnei Yisrael Asher Yotza Me'eretz Mitzrayim L'Savot B'Yad Moshe and Aaron. These are the journeys of the children of Israel who went forth from the land of Egypt according to the legions under the hands of Moshe and Aaron. It then goes on to list what all these journeys were. It takes up over a third of this parsha. And the question is, why is so much attention? What is the significance and what is so much attention being put to this? I'll be also speaking about this and also trying to connect making connection between it and the previous Parshas Mattos. Hashem then declares what the boundaries of the land of the Eretz Israel are. And then Hashem spoke to Moshe and said which leader of each tribe will deal with the division of the land. Together with Eliezer Cohen, who took over when Aaron died. Aaron Cohen died, and Yeshua, the son of Nun. Then it goes on to discuss the land, the 48 cities that the Levium are going to get, since they're not concentrated in one area. And it then goes on talking about the Ori Miklat, the cities of refuge. There's somebody in gross negligence kills somebody without any malicious intent, they have to go to the cities, and there's the rules on how all of that is done. The Parsha ends with a follow-up to the disorders of Slavakad that I discussed, that was mentioned last week's Parsha, where they said just because our father died, he wasn't part of one of the rebellions. Why should we suffer because he had no sons? And God says that they have to have the land both as from the firstborn as well as the inheritance of their father. And the tribe of Manasseh, part of it's complaining, yeah, but if we do that, then what's going to happen is they can marry members of another tribe, and their inheritance will eventually go to their sons, and will lead to land transferring from one tribe to the other. They then go into great detail. They go into some detail about how that should be done. And Hashem and Moshe says that they must marry members of their own tribe, and they marry their cousins, which is miraculous because they were not young and very wise women. And that's not the easiest time for a woman, even in those days, to be able to find a spouse. In any event, it all works out perfectly. And it ends with the final pasuk, Elu mitzvahs mishpatim, mishpatim she'eshetz Hashem biyad Moshe al bnei Israel ma'aravos Moav al Yarden Jericho. These are the commandments and ordinances that Hashem commanded through Moshe to the children of Israel in the plains of Moab, at the Jordan, and by Jericho. Now, one thing I would like to focus on at the beginning is this whole incident, looking at Parashat Mattos, of the land of fact that the remaining God and half the tribe of Manasseh got the land on the East Bank, not Israel proper. But as background to that, it is part of the continuing, I would be going to suggest, a part of a continuing preparation and for entering Eretz Israel, elevation of the Jewish people and purifying them. And it all really started with having to go down to Egypt. Yaakov and his sons and grandchildren had to go down to Mitzrayim because there were certain imperfections within the people that needed to be purified through the suffering of slavery. It's referred to as an iron furnace, and in smelting iron, steel, you have to get out the impurities of the iron, or at least most of them, and that was what was being done there. Now, another question is, so that was the beginning of the process. This process of purifying and taking only those people, God's process, taking only those people who truly wanted to enter Eretz Israel, was done with in Egypt. During the plague of darkness, Hashem killed all those Jews and quietly had them quietly buried them, but did not want to leave so the Egyptians couldn't see it. Plague of darkness wanted to get rid of all of those people who get rid of all those people who didn't want to leave. That was 80 to 90% of the Jewish population. So the 10 to 15% of the Jewish population that survived the process were those who really wanted to go. And that was another act of perfection. He continued after we crossed the Yam Suf. That was a test of our level, though nobody was killed there. And we see this process again, testing, in other words, the sin of the Egel Zahav, golden calf. Many people did not succumb to the test. Those who did, which was numbering in a few thousand, were executed. However, there was enough people. Now, continuing this perfection elevation process was a lens into the spies, when the spies went into the land. Then the spies landed land, two of them, Yeshua and Caleb, praised the land and said, have faith in Hashem, because Hashem showed miracle after miracle, crossing of the Red Sea and other miracles, and many did miracles in the desert, not to mention giving of the Torah and Hashem's presence there. Yet they were not at the level, so Hashem took that whole generation of people, all the men from 20 to 60, and bringing us to Levium didn't believe the lies of the spies. Yeshua and Caleb were also righteous because they believed in Hashem, and the two righteous spies, they got to go in. Yeshua became the next leader after Moshe, when Moshe had to die in Moab. And on top of that, none of the women of all ages had more amun and betachon. So we see another, so that whole generation of men were not deserving of going up to Eretz Israel, since they didn't trust Hashem, accept Hashem's promises, and their children went in their place. The ones they said would be killed by the Canaanites, in fact, weren't at all. Quite the opposite. The Canaanites were conquered. And we see this process. Now, with this background, I want to go to the incident of Reuven, Gad, and their tribe Manasseh. Now, they had a lot of cattle, and they said, this is good land for cattle. Nowhere in this conversation with Moshe did it ever, before they started, did it ever occur to them that the Eretz Israel had a Kedusha, holiness, that the land where they were going might be good materially, but did not have the same level of holiness as Eretz Canaan. Yet, and their priorities, as I mentioned before, were also wrong, because they put their cows above another wild stock above their children, and by implication their wives also. However, that's on a Bishad level, the basic level. However, there is something deeper going, and I think this will also explain why they had this rather warped view of what was important, putting their material goods and possessions over the holiness of Eretz Israel, land of Israel they were entering. And as explained in the Luti and the Kuti Torah of the Arizal, there was something going on deeper here. They did not merit to go into the land of Israel. Why? Because let's look at the three tribes, or 2.5 tribes that occurred to. Regarding the tribe of Reuven, Reuven was the firstborn. As Yaakov described, he was my firstborn, my first koach, but unstable as water. This is cut from the Sefer Bereshis. And the question is, in what way was Reuven? Where did that come from? Reuven, start was like this. Yaakov was with at his wedding night. He thought he was with Rachel. However, he wound up being with Leah, because Laban had made the switch. And from this, because the conception is the was caused in these difficult circumstances. Reuven became somewhat unstable, as we see in certain incidents, including the one with Bila. In any event, because of that instability and that lack of soul perfection, his descendants are not allowed to go into the land. And if you look, when there was the rebellion by Korach, the 250 people that were also rebelling were all from the tribe of the Ephraim incidents, were also from the tribe of Reuven. Now we see something similar with the tribe of Gad, whose name is spelled Gimel Aleph Dalet. I'll get back to that in a minute. And what happened there? What happened there was the Leah was not able to conceive any more children after the first 4 children. And what did she do then? What happened then? So she Leah took her Zilpah, her maidservant, to be with Yaakov. Rachel had done that twice because she couldn't conceive children. No problem. Nothing was unstable about these 2 tribes. So what was the difference with God? Is that when she took him, Zilpah, to Yaakov, she never told him that she had traded place for her with Zilpah. And again, the same problem came. It destabilized God to a certain extent. In fact, when this incident, when it's mentioned, his name is spelled in some places Gimel Dalet, the Aleph missing to show that there was an imperfection there. Now, what about the half tribe of Manasseh? First of all, why only a half tribe? Now, the practical, physical reason was they needed at least another half tribe to be able to occupy the land and settle it, because it was a huge area territorially. However, there's something else going on here. Manasseh and Ephraim were children of Yosef. Now, Yosef's wife was Asnat. Now, who was she? She was the daughter of Dinah that was conceived with the terrible incident with Shem. And so Asnat, half of her had the purity of Dinah, daughter of Yaakov, but she also inherited the klipot, the spiritual impurities, which arose after Adam and Chava committed the sin of eating that piece of fruit, Eitz Hadas Tov and Ra, and many sparks of Kedusha went into places of impurity, what's called the klipot. Within those sparks of Kedusha, there is purity, there is a spark of Kedusha within the impurities. Now, with Dinah, so why didn't the tribe of Ephraim have to go? Well, Yosef was totally Kodesh, she was totally pure, totally holy. And unfortunately, Asnat consisted half of purity from Dinah and half of impurity, the klipot, from Shem. Now, in the case of Ephraim, it was a combination of the Kedusha, the holy side of Yosef, it was pure Kedusha, holiness, and from the holy side of Dinah. Now, what about the tribe of Menashe? The tribe of Menashe was a little more complicated because one half of the spiritual genetics inheritance was from Yosef, who was totally Kodesh. Now, with terms of Menashe, half of that child, half of Menashe, original Menashe. So the Menashe also had the klipot of Shem, as well as the purity of Dinah. And so one half of the tribe, descendants, or purity of Dinah with and Yosef's side, and that side of Asnat. The other part, again, had spiritual impurities, and that half of the tribe of Menashe was spiritually had the klipot, the impurities, and as well as the kedusha. There was 3/4 kedusha, a half from Yosef and a quarter from Dinah. The other quarter, unfortunately, was klipot, and they were not allowed to enter into the land. Now I'd like to turn to Parashat Mattos-Masei, and as I spoke about before, it began with it's a listing of 40 places. 40 places that they traveled, and the Greek book of Pasuk. El Masei Bnei Israel Asher Yetzu Meretz Mitzrayim L'Savo B'Yad Moshe B'Aaron. Now, it seems like a guide book of 42 places, 42 towns that the Bnei Israel traveled in 40 years. Some were before the sin of the spies, most of them after the sin of the spies. Over 1/3 of the Parashat Mattos-Masei is a listing of these places. So what's the significance of them? Now, on one level of these 42 journeys, on one level, it's dealing with the 42 word name of Hashem, which represents the Shekhinah, which is an aspect of the ineffable name of Hashem, the one we don't pronounce, and they're connected. Now, these 42 levels, these were all places we had to go through. Another question is, it says they journeyed from one place to another. We say today, they journeyed from Jerusalem to Bnei Brak. Instead of saying they went to Bnei Brak, they arrived in Bnei Brak, describing where you go. Why are they describing what's the significance of the journey? And to understand the greater significance of this list of journey and these journeys, these are all places of growth and testing for the Bnei Israel. To go into it in a somewhat deeper level, and this is based on the Or HaChaim HaKodesh. He explains in some depth what is really going on. Now, first of all, what does it say under the hand of Moshe and Aaron? As he explains, based on Zohar, that what had to be done was the sparks of Kedusha, the sparks of holiness, had to be collected. Now, as I explained before, we're dealing with the klipot, the impure sparks of Kedusha that got trapped in impurity. And we're again seeing a perfection process because these 42 places were inherited by Klipot. Apparently, Klipot, and one thing just before that, why did it say Moshe and Aaron? Because on a deeper level, Moshe represents all the neshimas of the people, Jewish people. Something I'll be explaining in more detail in another portion. In other words, the collective shorish soul of the 600,000 Jewish souls was from Moshe, and why Aaron, who was so for the office of the Shekhinah, would unite them. Remember, his man of Shalom. Because two reasons. One, by bringing korbanot, that helps bring sparks of kedusha out of the impurity, and even more than that, because he was the one in charge of the Aaron Kodesh, and the Torah was the second element. Now, to get these klipot out, impurity, which were clustered in these 42 locations, they were clustered in these 42 locations, and to get them out, you needed three things. And the three things you needed were the Shekhinah, Hashem's presence, that also ties into the 42 word name of Hashem. And on top of that, you also needed Hashem's presence. The Shekhinah was going to be pulled out with that. You needed the 600,000 Jewish neshamas, and you needed the Torah. And those three combined were able to were accomplish what needed to be done. And therefore, these journeys will perfect everybody. And that is the greatest significance. Now, why did it say in there, they journeyed from one place to the next? Normally, you would think where they arrived is more important. As I said, one goes from Yerushalayim to Bnei Brak. You say you went to Bnei Brak, and say where you're settling, not where you came from. So it is the following reasons given by the time that when the people, Bnei Israel, arrived at a location, it didn't indicate, nothing had started yet. To pull out those sparks of Kedusha, they had to spend time there. They had to pull the sparks of Kedusha out. And that in some places took time. Why in some places they were there for a very short time, or didn't even have to stop, because it was easy to pull out. In other places it wasn't. Now, if it hadn't been for the sin of the golden calf, and later in Meraglim, we wouldn't have had the journey to those 42 points. The sparks of Kedusha would have come and followed us. But because we were not at that level, we sank down. We had to take it step by step. A number of those places, there were rebellions, where people suffered, spies, Meraglim being in it. When they believed the lies of Meraglim being a prime one, affected the whole generation of men, 20 to 60. But all this, in addition to the sadness of those who didn't make it, is also preparing and elevating people to go in. And this is the common theme. Just as those 2.5 tribes were not allowed to go in, so too the other tribes were perfected, that did go into Eretz Israel. Now, a question that remains here is what other significance it had? We talked about the sparks, but even the places they were going themselves, the names of the places, the letters, also had a significance, as explained by Rav Shimshon Ostropoli, very famous Rav in the 1600s in Ukraine, who unfortunately died al Kiddush Hashem during the Kalmaniki uprising, explained that each one of those places had, and it was not clear to the Bnei Israel, this is where faith in Hashem came, which place they were going to be going to, because if you look, instead of going to the next place on the list, they could have gone to the one after that. There was no clear path. This was only belief in Hashem. When he rose up, when his cloud rose up, the Bnei Israel marched, and when the cloud, when his column of fire went down, the people stopped so that they could, and this is something only Hashem could determine how much time was needed to remove the sparks of Kedusha from the klipot, the impurity, and therefore they had to have faith in Hashem. Also, and it's beyond the scope of the Stavar Torah, it's explained that those 42 letter names, and this is explained by the Klutei Torah of Rav Shlomo Zalman from Liadi, that according to the Baal Shem Tov, there was also an implication for the future. We also see this mentioned in the Shem B'Shmol, the second Sagar Rebbe's commentary on Chumash, the books of Moses, the Torah, that this was also preparing for the future, because by doing so, and by the nature of the trips, that, as I said, Rav Shimshon Ostropoli explains, were the different ways they went, and the interconnection with the Hebrew letters of the names of these places also helped with the whole Kedusha process, gaining sparks of Kedusha, and also raising up the level of the people. Now, it says it's also for the future. Now, it's there for the immediate future for entering into Eretz Israel, but it has a meaning beyond that. Now, in terms of entering into Eretz Israel, we were elevated at a point where if we hadn't committed the sins that eventually led to the exile from the first temple, and later on the second temple, history could have been completed, redemption could have occurred, and the people would have, that would have been the end of history as we understand it, and Mashiach would have come a long, long time ago. And fortunately, it did not happen. And when we went into exiles, those sparks of Kedusha, the process, which if we had perfected ourselves, sparks of Kedusha that were trapped in the klipot from all the other nations would have just come to us. But because we didn't do that, we then had to go into the various exiles. And in those exiles, through our suffering and our learning of Torah, we were able to pull out and collect the sparks of Kedusha. That's been our process throughout history. Now, what personal lesson does these 42 places have to do with us? And just as the people in the Midbar, in the desert, had to go to those different journeys to raise themselves and elevate themselves, Baal Shem Tov explains as brought down by Rav Shlomo Rav Liadi. And what was that? That we have 42 journeys in our life. It's 42 spiritual levels we're supposed to obtain. It's beyond the scope of this parsha, of this Devar Torah, to list them all. But if we go through those 42 places and successfully do the spiritual achievements we're supposed to do in each, we are elevating not only ourselves, we are elevating the world in the higher final tikkun, and we should all be redeemed. I'd like to wish everybody a good Shabbos and Shabbat Shalom.